I never thought grocery deliveries would land anyone in jail, but watching the security footage play in that Scottsdale courtroom, while Susan Blackwell's face turned progressively redder, proved me wrong about a lot of things. My name is Preston Daniels, and I moved into the Saguaro Heights community in Scottsdale, Arizona, about 8 months ago. The development was one of those newer planned neighborhoods where every house looked vaguely similar, but different enough that you could tell them apart if you squinted. Beige stucco, terracotta roofs, desert landscaping with precisely measured gravel, and the occasional cactus that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. It was nice, clean, and exactly what I needed after my divorce finalized. A fresh start in a place where nobody knew me, nobody pitied me, and I could just exist without the weight of my failed marriage hanging over every interaction. The homeowners association seemed standard when I bought the place. Monthly dues, some rules about lawn maintenance and exterior paint colors, the usual suburban nonsense that I figured I could live with. The woman who sold me the house mentioned that the HOA president was very involved in the community, which should have been my first warning sign. In HOA language, very involved usually translates to will make your life miserable over the smallest infractions. But I was too focused on getting settled to pay attention to red flags. Susan appeared at my door exactly 3 days after I moved in. She was in her late 40s, with that specific hairstyle that defies both gravity and common sense. The kind where the blonde highlights are trying desperately to hide the gray underneath. She wore a pantsuit in desert mauve and carried a leather-bound folder that she clutched like it contained nuclear launch codes. "Welcome to Saguaro Heights," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I'm Susan Blackwell, HOA president. I wanted to personally ensure you received your welcome packet and understood our community guidelines." I invited her in, mostly because I was raised to be polite, and spent the next 45 minutes listening to her explain in excruciating detail every single rule, regulation, and expectation of living in Saguaro Heights. Garbage bins had to be stored out of sight except on collection days. No vehicles could be parked on the street overnight. Lawn watering could only happen on designated days and times. Holiday decorations required approval and had to be removed within 48 hours of the holiday ending. The list went on, each item delivered with the solemnity of biblical commandments. "We maintain very high standards here," Susan said, tapping a manicured nail against her folder. "The property values in Saguaro Heights are among the highest in this zip code, and we intend to keep it that way. I'm sure you understand." I understood that I had made a terrible mistake, but the mortgage papers were signed and I was committed. I nodded along, assured her I would follow all the rules, and practically pushed her out the door when she finally ran out of regulations to recite. The first few months were actually fine. I kept to myself, followed the rules, and focused on my job as a software consultant. Working remotely meant I spent most of my time in my home office, dealing with code and client meetings instead of neighbors. I did my grocery shopping online, having deliveries dropped at my door because I despised crowds, and the Arizona heat made even short trips to the store feel like traversing the surface of Mercury. That was when the problem started. The first time it happened, I thought I had simply misremembered placing the order. I could have sworn I had scheduled a delivery for Tuesday afternoon, but when I checked my doorstep at the designated time, nothing was there. I went back through my email confirmations, and yes, the delivery had been marked as completed at 2:47 p.m. The driver had even uploaded a photo of the bags sitting on my front porch, right next to my potted barrel cactus, but the bags were gone. I called the grocery store's customer service, explained the situation, and they refunded my order without much fuss. These things happen, they said. Sometimes deliveries got stolen or left at the wrong house. They would put a note on my account. I ordered again, this time paying more attention to the delivery window, and actually stood by my front window watching for the truck. The delivery driver arrived at 4:15 p.m., a young guy in his 20s with the perpetually stressed expression of someone juggling multiple gig economy jobs. He unloaded 4 bags of groceries, set them carefully on my porch, took his photo, and drove off. I waited about 10 minutes before going to collect them, just to finish up an email I was sending to a client. When I opened my front door, 3 of the 4 bags were gone. I actually stepped outside and looked around, wondering if the wind had somehow blown them away, which was absurd because grocery bags filled with canned goods and milk do not simply blow away. That was when I noticed Susan walking back toward her house, which was 4 doors down from mine on the opposite side of the street. She was moving quickly, not quite running but definitely walking with purpose, and I could have sworn I saw her glancing back over her shoulder. Something felt off, but I had no proof of anything. I grabbed the remaining bag, which contained mostly produce, and went back inside. The missing bags had contained the meat, dairy, and most of the pantry items I had ordered. I was out nearly $120 in groceries, and this time when I called customer service, they were less sympathetic. "Sir, this is the second time in 2 weeks you've reported a delivery as missing," the woman on the phone said. "Our driver confirmed delivery with photographic evidence both times." "I understand that, but someone is taking the groceries after they're delivered," I said, trying to keep my frustration in check. "Have you filed a police report for theft?" "No, I was hoping you could help me first. We can attempt one more delivery, but if this happens again, you may need to arrange for signature confirmation or pick up at the store. We can't continue refunding orders when our drivers are fulfilling their obligations." I agreed to another delivery, feeling like I was being blamed for something completely out of my control. This time, I decided to be strategic. I set up my laptop near the front window with a clear view of the porch and kept it angled so I could see the screen while working. I also requested the earliest delivery window possible, right at 8 o'clock a.m., figuring that whoever was taking my groceries might not be as bold in broad daylight. The delivery came at 8:23 a.m. I watched the driver set down 6 bags, snap his photo, and leave. I immediately went to retrieve them, not even waiting 30 seconds. All 6 bags were still there. I felt a wave of relief mixed with confusion. Maybe the previous incidents had been flukes, or maybe whoever was responsible had gotten the message that I was paying attention now. That relief lasted exactly 4 days, until my next scheduled delivery. This time I had ordered more specialty items, things that were harder to find in regular stores. Specific brands of protein powder, some imported pasta, fancy cheese that cost more than it had any right to. The delivery window was 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock p.m. I had a client meeting at 1:30, but I kept my camera on my phone pointed at the front door during the call, just in case. The meeting ran longer than expected, some issue with the project timeline that required extensive discussion, and by the time I checked my email at 3:45, the delivery had been marked complete at 2:15 p.m. I ended the video call and rushed to the front door. Empty, not a single bag in sight. I checked the photo the driver had uploaded, and there they were, 7 bags of groceries sitting on my porch, right where they should have been. This time I was furious. I grabbed my phone and walked outside, looking up and down the street. Most of my neighbors were at work, the street quiet except for the distant hum of air conditioning units fighting against the desert heat. Then I saw her. Susan was in her front yard, adjusting one of her precisely placed decorative rocks, but she kept glancing in my direction. When our eyes met, she straightened up and waved, that same fake smile plastered across her face. I walked over to her house, my anger simmering just below the surface. "Susan, have you noticed anyone suspicious around the neighborhood lately?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Suspicious how?" She replied, brushing dust off her hands. "Someone has been stealing my grocery deliveries. This is the third time now." Her expression shifted into something that looked like concern but felt performative. "Oh my goodness, that's terrible. Have you considered that maybe the delivery drivers are making mistakes? I've heard stories about them taking photos at one house and delivering to another. The photos clearly show my porch. My address number is visible in every single one. Well, that is strange." She tilted her head, studying me. "You know, Preston, if you're having so many problems with deliveries, perhaps you should consider shopping in person like the rest of us. All these delivery trucks driving through the neighborhood constantly, it really does affect our property values. People want to live in a peaceful community, not one that looks like a warehouse district." I felt my jaw tighten. "I don't think 1 or 2 delivery trucks a week constitute a warehouse district." "You'd be surprised how these things accumulate," she said, her tone shifting from fake concern to barely concealed condescension. "I've actually been meaning to propose some restrictions on delivery services at our next HOA meeting. Too many homeowners are relying on them, and it's changing the character of our neighborhood. So you're going to ban grocery deliveries. Not ban, regulate. Perhaps limiting them to certain times of day or requiring homeowners to be present to receive deliveries immediately. We can't have bags of groceries sitting on porches for hours. It looks untidy." I wanted to point out that my groceries never sat on porches for hours because someone kept stealing them, but something in her expression made me pause. The way she emphasized the word immediately, the slight curl of her lip when she mentioned bags sitting on porches. It felt personal, like she was criticizing me specifically rather than making a general observation. "I'll keep that in mind," I said, turning to walk back to my house. "Oh, and Preston," she called after me. "I noticed your garbage bin was still visible from the street last Thursday evening, well past the designated storage time. Please make sure it's put away promptly on collection days. We received several complaints." I wanted to tell her exactly where she could put her complaints, but I just nodded and kept walking. The garbage bin thing was petty nonsense. I had brought it in maybe an hour later than usual because I had been on an important work call. But Susan was clearly the type of person who kept meticulous track of everyone's minor violations, storing them up like ammunition for future use. Back at my house, I sat down and tried to think through the situation logically. Someone was taking my groceries, that much was certain. The most likely culprit was someone in the neighborhood who knew when deliveries were happening and could act quickly. Susan lived close enough to see delivery trucks arriving at my house, and she had the time and opportunity to cross the street and grab bags while I was occupied with work. But accusing your HOA president of theft without proof seemed like a spectacularly bad idea. I needed evidence. I spent the next few hours researching doorbell cameras and security systems. I had been meaning to install something since moving in, but had kept putting it off. Now, it felt essential. I ordered a video doorbell with motion detection and cloud recording, paying extra for next-day delivery. Then immediately realized the irony of having a delivery stolen before I could install the security camera meant to prevent delivery theft. I took the following day off work. something I rarely did, and waited for the camera to arrive. It came at 11 o'clock a.m., and I practically yanked it out of the delivery driver's hands before he could even turn away. The installation took about an hour, mostly because I wanted to make sure the angle captured not just my porch, but also a good portion of the street and sidewalk. When I was done, I tested it several times from my phone, watching the live feed and reviewing the motion-triggered recordings. Perfect. I scheduled another grocery delivery for 3 days later, this time ordering enough food to last me 2 weeks. If Susan wanted to steal groceries, I was going to make sure I caught her in crystal clear high definition. The waiting was torture. I went through my work routine on autopilot, distracted by constantly checking my camera feed even though nothing interesting was happening. A few cars driving by, the mail carrier making deliveries, a stray cat wandering through someone's yard. The neighborhood was almost aggressively boring, which made the grocery theft feel even more surreal. This was supposed to be a safe, upscale community, where the biggest drama involved someone planting non-approved flowers or painting their mailbox the wrong shade of beige. Delivery day arrived, and I was ready. The window was 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock p.m., and I had scheduled a long client meeting from 2:30 to 4 o'clock, giving the impression that I would be completely occupied. I kept my phone next to my laptop, the camera app open but muted, my eyes flicking between my work screen and the camera feed. At 3:17 p.m., the delivery truck pulled up. I watched the driver, a different person this time, a middle-aged woman with her hair in a ponytail, haul 8 heavy bags up to my porch. She arranged them neatly, took her photo, and drove away. The bags sat there, visible in the afternoon sun, filled with everything from frozen dinners to fresh fruit to expensive coffee beans. I continued my meeting, forcing myself to focus on what my client was saying while simultaneously watching my phone screen. Nothing happened for 10 minutes. Then 15. I started to wonder if Susan had gotten wise to the camera, if she had noticed it during one of her vigilant patrols of the neighborhood and decided to abandon her theft operation. Then, at 3:34 p.m., she appeared. Susan walked across the street from her house with a casual, unhurried pace, carrying a reusable shopping bag in each hand. She glanced around once, a quick scan of the street, then stepped onto my porch. Without any hesitation, she started loading my grocery bags into her own bags, working quickly but methodically. She took 6 of the 8 bags, leaving behind only 2, just like last time. The whole operation took less than 90 seconds. Then she turned and walked back across the street, the weight of the stolen groceries evident in how the bags pulled at her shoulders. I watched it happen in real time, and even though I had suspected her, seeing the actual theft made my blood boil. This woman, this self-righteous HOA president who lectured me about community standards and property values, was casually stealing from my porch in broad daylight. I wanted to run outside and confront her immediately, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had the video evidence now. I needed to handle this properly. "Sorry, could you repeat that last part?" I said to my client, realizing I had completely missed whatever he had just said. The meeting dragged on for another 15 minutes. The moment it ended, I went outside and collected the 2 remaining bags, then immediately downloaded the camera footage to my computer and backed it up to 3 different locations. This video was going to be my proof, and I was not taking any chances of losing it. I spent the evening trying to decide on my next move. Part of me wanted to march over to Susan's house and demand she return my groceries or reimburse me for them. The more rational part of my brain knew that confronting her alone would likely just make things worse. She would deny everything, there would be no witnesses, and I would have played my hand without accomplishing anything. Instead, I decided to document everything properly. I compiled all the delivery confirmations, the photos from the drivers, the dates and times of each theft, the total cost of all the missing groceries, which came to just over $450 at this point. I also made multiple copies of the video footage showing Susan taking my groceries. The next morning, I called the Scottsdale Police Department non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher listened patiently as I described the repeated thefts and told me an officer would come by to take a report. Officer Mike Torres arrived about 2 hours later, a stocky guy in his 30s with the kind of mustache that suggested he took his coffee extremely seriously. I showed him the video footage on my laptop, and his eyebrows rose progressively higher as Susan appeared on screen and loaded my groceries into her bags. "Well, that's pretty clear-cut," he said. "You have her taking identifiable items that were delivered to your address. The fact that you have all the delivery confirmations and prior incidents documented helps establish a pattern. This qualifies as petty theft under Arizona law since the total value exceeds the minimum threshold." "What happens now?" I asked. "I'll need to take a formal statement from you. Then I'll go speak with Miss Blackwell. Given that we have video evidence, she'll likely be cited and have to appear in court. Depending on her response and whether she has prior offenses, the prosecutor will decide how to proceed." "She's not going to be happy about this," I said, stating the obvious. Officer Torres gave me a sympathetic look. "I've dealt with HOA disputes before. They can get ugly, but theft is theft, regardless of who's doing it or what their position is in the community. You have every right to file this report." I gave my formal statement, signed the necessary paperwork, and watched Officer Torres drive down the street toward Susan's house. I probably should have stayed inside and let things play out, but curiosity got the better of me. I watched from my front window as Officer Torres rang Susan's doorbell and waited. She answered after a moment, and even from a distance, I could see her posture change when she saw the police uniform. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes, with Susan shaking her head repeatedly and gesturing emphatically. Finally, Officer Torres handed her something, probably the citation, and returned to his patrol car. My phone rang 30 seconds after he drove away. It was Susan. "How dare you," she hissed before I could even say hello, "calling the police on me over a misunderstanding. This is absolutely ridiculous." "A misunderstanding." I kept my voice level. "The video shows you taking my groceries. I was helping you. I saw those bags sitting out in the heat and thought I would bring them inside for you since you clearly weren't home. I was going to return them later. You took them to your house, and this is the 4th time my groceries have gone missing. You have no proof I was involved in any previous incidents, and today was a good deed that you've twisted into something criminal. I cannot believe you would attack me like this, after everything I do for this community." "Susan, the video clearly shows. I know what the video shows, and you've completely misinterpreted my intentions. This is harassment, Preston. You're harassing the HOA president because you don't like being held accountable for your violations of community standards. Well, I won't stand for it. You'll be hearing from my attorney." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding my phone, trying to process the conversation. Susan had gone from "it was a misunderstanding" to "I was helping you" to "this is harassment" in the span of about 2 minutes. The mental gymnastics required to frame herself as the victim were almost impressive. The next few days were tense. I had to give another statement to the prosecutor's office, who reviewed the case and decided to move forward with charges. Susan's attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia something, tried to negotiate a dismissal, arguing that Susan's explanation of trying to help was plausible, and that prosecuting a respected community leader over a simple misunderstanding was a waste of resources. The prosecutor, a tired-looking man named Robert Chen, who I met briefly during one of my statements, disagreed. The value of the stolen property, combined with the video evidence showing Miss Blackwell taking items that didn't belong to her without permission, and no apparent attempt to return them or contact the homeowner, supports a theft charge, he told Patricia during a meeting I was present for. If your client wants to plead guilty to a lesser charge and make restitution, we can discuss that. Otherwise, we're going to trial. Susan refused any plea deal, apparently convinced that a jury would see things her way. Her attorney seemed less confident but proceeded with the not guilty plea. Meanwhile, my life in Saguaro Heights became significantly more complicated. Susan put my house under what could only be described as microscopic scrutiny. I received violation notices for leaving my garbage bin visible for 20 minutes longer than allowed. Another notice, because one of my desert plants was apparently 0.8 inches taller than the maximum height specified in the landscaping guidelines, which I had no idea even existed. Another notice, because I had parked my car in my driveway at an angle that was technically 1 degree off from being perfectly perpendicular to the street, which somehow violated parking regulations. Each violation came with a fine, and while the individual amounts were small, they added up quickly. It was death by 1,000 cuts, Susan's way of retaliating without doing anything overtly illegal. I contested every single one, sending detailed responses explaining why each violation was either factually incorrect or an absurd overreach of HOA authority. This created even more paperwork and meetings, sucking up time I should have been spending on work. Other homeowners started talking. I ran into my next-door neighbor, an older retired guy named Tom, while checking my mail one afternoon. "Heard you're having some trouble with Susan," he said, keeping his voice low even though we were alone. "She's been stealing my groceries, and now she's retaliating because I reported her to the police," I said bluntly. Tom glanced around nervously. "Look, I'm not saying I don't believe you, but you need to be careful. Susan has run this HOA for 6 years, and she's got most of the board in her pocket. She can make your life hell in ways you haven't even imagined yet. She's already started. It'll get worse. I've seen her go after people before. There was a family 3 streets over who tried to fight a fine for having the wrong color curtains visible from the street. Susan harassed them with violations until they sold their house and moved away. Another guy questioned her financial management of the HOA budget, and suddenly, his house was being inspected for code violations every other week until he dropped it. So everyone just lets her do whatever she wants." Tom shrugged helplessly. "Most people figure it's easier to keep your head down and follow the rules. The ones who don't either move away or eventually give up. Susan's got time, resources, and a need to be in control that borders on pathological. You're not going to win this fight." "I already won," I said. "I have her on video committing theft. The trial is just a formality." Tom looked at me with something like pity. "Maybe you'll win in court, but you still have to live here, and Susan holds all the cards when it comes to the HOA. Just remember that." He walked away, leaving me standing there with my mail and a growing sense that I had underestimated how vindictive Susan could be. But I had committed to this path now, and backing down felt like letting her get away with theft just because she held a position of petty authority. The trial was scheduled for 6 weeks out, which felt like an eternity. In the meantime, Susan escalated her campaign of harassment. I received a notice that I needed to repaint my front door because the color had faded beyond acceptable standards, despite the fact that I had literally just moved in 8 months ago, and the paint was obviously fine. When I ignored that notice, I got a follow-up threatening legal action if I didn't comply within 30 days. I also started noticing Susan or other HOA board members driving by my house at odd times, clearly looking for any possible violation they could document. It felt like living under surveillance, which was ironic considering I was the one who had installed a security camera to catch an actual criminal. Work became my escape. I threw myself into projects, taking on extra clients and working longer hours just to avoid thinking about the HOA drama. My boss noticed during one of our virtual check-ins. "You're putting in a lot of overtime lately," she said. "Is everything okay?" I gave her the abbreviated version of the situation, and she listened with increasing disbelief. "Let me get this straight. Your HOA president has been stealing your groceries. You caught her on video, and now she's retaliating by fining you for nonsense violations." That's the summary, yes. Preston, that's insane. Can't you just move? I bought this place 8 months ago. The market's soft right now, and even if I wanted to sell, Susan would probably find ways to sabotage the sale. Besides, why should I have to move because she's a thief and a tyrant? "Pride's going to make you miserable," my boss said, not unkindly. "Sometimes the smart move is cutting your losses." Maybe she was right, but I was too stubborn to admit it. The weeks crawled by. Susan continued her harassment campaign, and I continued documenting everything and fighting every violation. I also reached out to other homeowners in the neighborhood, trying to find anyone else who had experienced similar problems. What I found was enlightening and depressing in equal measure. A woman named Rachel 3 streets over told me that she suspected Susan had been taking packages from her porch last year. But she never had proof, and eventually just started having everything delivered to her office. A couple near the neighborhood entrance mentioned that Susan had fined them repeatedly for having guests park on the street during a family gathering, claiming the vehicles created a traffic hazard, even though the street was completely clear. Another homeowner said he had tried to run for the HOA board to provide some oversight on Susan's decisions, but she had used procedural rules to disqualify his candidacy on a technicality. The picture that emerged was of a woman who had consolidated power over the years and used it to control every aspect of neighborhood life. Most people either complied or suffered in silence, too worn down to fight back. I was just the first one foolish enough to involve the police. As the trial date approached, I met with Robert Chen, the prosecutor, several more times to go over my testimony. He was confident about the case. "The video evidence is compelling, and we have the delivery driver who dropped off your groceries that day willing to testify that he left 8 bags on your porch. We also have your documentation of the previous thefts establishing a pattern." Miss Blackwell's defense that she was trying to help you doesn't hold up when you consider she took the items to her home and made no attempt to contact you or return them. "What's the likely outcome?" I asked. "If she's convicted, petty theft in Arizona can result in up to 6 months in jail and fines, though for a first offense she'll likely get probation, community service, and restitution. The criminal record is really the biggest consequence, and that doesn't get expunged, not automatically. She would have to petition for that after completing all the terms of her sentence, which could take years." The trial was held at the Scottsdale Municipal Court on a Tuesday morning in late September. The Arizona heat had finally started to break, the the temperature dropping from surface of the sun to merely uncomfortably warm. I wore my best suit, wanting to look professional and credible, and arrived 30 minutes early. Susan was already there with her attorney, sitting in the gallery and radiating hostility. She wore a conservative navy dress and pearls, clearly going for the respectable community leader look. When she saw me, her expression could have curdled milk. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with maybe 20 seats for observers and a simple setup with the judge's bench, the witness stand, and tables for the prosecution and defense. A few people from the neighborhood had shown up, probably curious to see how this played out. I recognized Tom, my neighbor, sitting in the back row. Judge Maria Hernandez presided, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who made it clear from her opening remarks that she had little patience for wasting her time. The prosecutor and defense attorney made their opening statements, laying out their respective versions of events. Patricia argued that Susan had acted out of concern for a neighbor's property, and that the entire situation was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Robert countered that the evidence clearly showed theft, and that Susan's explanations didn't hold up under scrutiny. I was called as the first witness. Taking the stand felt surreal, like I was watching myself in a movie rather than actually living through the experience. Robert walked me through the timeline of events, having me establish where I lived, my relationship with Susan as HOA president, and the pattern of missing grocery deliveries. "Can you tell the court what happened on the afternoon of August 15th? Robert asked. I described scheduling the delivery, being on a client call, and watching my security camera feed as Susan took my groceries. Robert pulled up the video on a screen visible to everyone in the courtroom. Watching it again, even after seeing it dozens of times, still made me angry. Susan's casual theft, the way she looked around to make sure no one was watching, the methodical transfer of bags from my porch to her own shopping bags, it was all right there in clear, high-definition video. And did Miss Blackwell contact you at any point after taking your groceries to let you know she had them? Robert asked. No. She called me after the police officer visited her and claimed she had intended to return them, but she never actually made any attempt to do so. Patricia cross-examined me, trying to poke holes in my story. She suggested that maybe I had misunderstood Susan's intentions, that perhaps I had a grudge against her due to HOA violations I had received. I calmly explained that all the violations had come after I reported the theft, making it clear that Susan's actions were retaliatory rather than the other way around. Isn't it true that you've refused to comply with multiple legitimate HOA violations? Patricia asked. I've contested violations that I believe are either factually incorrect or unreasonable, I said, such as being fined because a plant was less than an inch taller than some arbitrary height limit. The HOA has established guidelines that all homeowners agree to follow when they purchase property in Saguaro Heights. Those guidelines don't include permission to steal residents' property. Patricia looked annoyed but moved on. After I stepped down, the prosecution called the delivery driver from that day. She testified that she had delivered 8 bags to my address at approximately 3:17 p.m., placed them on the porch, and taken the required photo before leaving. She had no interaction with anyone else and never saw Susan. The defense called Susan to testify. She took the stand with a martyred expression, like she was being persecuted rather than prosecuted. Under Patricia's gentle questioning, Susan described herself as a dedicated community leader who had devoted years to maintaining property values and neighborhood standards. She claimed that when she saw the grocery bags sitting on my porch that afternoon, She became concerned they would spoil in the heat and decided to take them to her home for safekeeping. "Why didn't you contact Mr. Daniels to let him know you had his groceries?" Patricia asked. "I intended to, but it slipped my mind. I had several HOA matters to attend to that afternoon, and by the time I remembered, it was late evening. I planned to return them the next day, but then the police showed up at my door before I had the chance." It was a carefully constructed explanation, delivered with just enough emotion to seem genuine. If not for the video evidence contradicting her story, it might have even been believable. Robert's cross-examination was surgical. He walked Susan through her explanation step by step, highlighting every inconsistency and implausibility. "Miss Blackwell, you testified that you were concerned the groceries would spoil in the heat. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Yet you didn't knock on Mr. Daniels' door to see if he was home before taking them." "I assumed he wasn't home, since the groceries were sitting outside. But you've testified that you're familiar with his schedule since you live in the same neighborhood. Did you consider that he might be working from home? I suppose he could have been. And when you took the groceries to your home, why didn't you immediately call or text Mr. Daniels to let him know you had them?" Susan hesitated. "As I said, it slipped my mind." "You forgot that you had taken several bags of groceries that didn't belong to you." "I was very busy with HOA responsibilities." Robert pulled up the video again, freezing it at the moment when Susan looked around before taking the bags. "This action here, where you're looking up and down the street, what were you doing?" "Just being aware of my surroundings." "It looks like you're checking to make sure no one is watching you take the groceries." "That's your interpretation. I was simply looking around." "Miss Blackwell, prior to this incident on August 15th, were you aware that Mr. Daniels had experienced multiple grocery delivery thefts?" Patricia objected, arguing that speculation about previous incidents was irrelevant, but Judge Hernandez allowed the question. "I may have heard him mention something about missing deliveries," Susan admitted carefully. "And yet, knowing he had been having problems with theft, you decided to take his groceries without telling him." Susan's composure started cracking. "I've already explained my reasoning. I was trying to be helpful, and Mr. Daniels has twisted this into something criminal because he's been hostile to the HOA since he moved in." "Has Mr. Daniels violated HOA guidelines?" "Multiple times, yes." "And when did these violations occur?" "Various times over the past several months." Robert pulled out documentation I had provided. According to this timeline, Mr. Daniels received his first HOA violation notice on August 17th, 2 days after the grocery theft. Prior to that, he had no violations on record. "Is that correct?" Susan's face flushed. "I would have to check the specific dates. I'm showing you the official HOA violation log, which you maintain as president. There are no entries for Mr. Daniels' address prior to August 17th, correct, if that's what the log says." "So your claim that he's been hostile to the HOA and repeatedly violated guidelines is false, isn't it?" "He violated guidelines. The dates don't change that. But the timing suggests retaliation for his filing a police report against you, doesn't it?" Patricia objected again, and this time Judge Hernandez sustained it. But the point had been made. The jury, 6 people who had been selected that morning and sat through the entire trial with varying degrees of attention, now had a clear picture of Susan's character and motivations. Closing arguments were brief. Patricia maintained that Susan had made an innocent mistake and that prosecuting her was a waste of judicial resources. Robert argued that the evidence overwhelmingly showed intentional theft and a pattern of behavior that demonstrated Susan had no respect for others' property rights. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they filed back in, I tried to read their expressions, but they remained neutral. The forewoman, a middle-aged Hispanic woman wearing glasses, handed the verdict form to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Hernandez. On the charge of petty theft, we find the defendant, Susan Blackwell, guilty. Susan's face went white, then red. She started to say something, but Patricia put a hand on her arm, stopping her. Judge Hernandez set a sentencing date for 3 weeks later and dismissed everyone. Outside the courtroom, Robert shook my hand. Clean verdict. The video evidence made it pretty straightforward. What happens now? I asked. Sentencing hearing. Given that it's her first offense, she'll likely get probation, restitution, and probably some community service. She'll also have a criminal record. And the HOA, that's a separate issue. You might want to consult with a civil attorney about the retaliation and whether you have grounds to sue the HOA or Susan personally. I thanked him and walked to my car, feeling a strange mix of vindication and exhaustion. I had won, but Tom's words echoed in my mind. I still had to live in Saguaro Heights, and Susan still controlled the HOA. The sentencing hearing 3 weeks later was anticlimactic. Judge Hernandez sentenced Susan to 2 years of probation, 100 hours of community service, and ordered her to pay me full restitution for all 4 grocery deliveries, totaling $453 plus court costs. She also had to write a formal letter of apology, though I suspected any apology Susan wrote would be through gritted teeth and devoid of actual remorse. The bigger consequence came from the neighborhood itself. Word of the conviction spread quickly, and suddenly other homeowners who had suffered under Susan's reign felt emboldened to speak up. A petition circulated demanding her resignation as HOA president, and while Susan initially refused, the HOA board held an emergency meeting where they voted 4-1 to remove her from the position. The one dissenting vote was Susan herself, still clinging to whatever authority she had left. Her replacement was a retired accountant named Gerald who lived 2 streets over and had the personality of lukewarm oatmeal. Boring, but fair. One of his first acts was reviewing all the violations Susan had issued in the past year and throwing out the obviously retaliatory ones, including all of mine. Susan moved out of Saguaro Heights 2 months later. I saw the moving truck pull up one morning while I was making coffee, and I watched as movers loaded her furniture in boxes. She had put her house on the market immediately after losing her HOA position, apparently deciding that living in a neighborhood where everyone knew she was a convicted thief was too humiliating to bear. Part of me felt bad for her. She had built her entire identity around controlling this little pocket of suburban Arizona, and losing that power had clearly broken something in her. But then, I remembered the casual way she had stolen from me, the vindictive harassment afterward, and the complete lack of remorse throughout the entire trial. Some people create their own destruction, and Susan had constructed hers brick by brick. Life in Saguaro Heights gradually returned to normal, or at least as normal as an HOA-controlled neighborhood can be. Gerald turned out to be a reasonable president who enforced the genuinely important rules while ignoring the petty nonsense Susan had obsessed over. My grocery deliveries arrived without incident, though I kept my security camera active just in case. I ran into Tom again about 6 months after Susan moved away. He was walking his dog, a yappy little terrier that seemed perpetually angry at everything. "You did what nobody else had the guts to do," he said without preamble. "Standing up to Susan, I mean. The neighborhood's better for it." "I just didn't want my groceries stolen," I said. "Maybe, but you changed things here. People aren't as afraid anymore." We actually had someone question a fine at the last HOA meeting, and Gerald listened and adjusted it. That never would have happened with Susan. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but victories often are. I had moved to Scottsdale for a fresh start, and I had ended up in the middle of suburban warfare over grocery deliveries and petty authority. But I had survived it, and more importantly, I had drawn a line that needed drawing. The security camera video that had captured Susan's theft remained backed up in multiple locations. A digital record of what happens when people in small positions of power forget that their authority has limits. Sometimes those limits are enforced by courts and judges and juries who watch a middle-aged woman in a suburban neighborhood commit petty theft because she felt entitled to whatever she wanted. I still live in Sagaro Heights. My house is paid for, my property values are stable, and my groceries arrive unmolested at my door. The HOA exists, as HOAs always will, with its rules and its meetings and its occasional absurdities. But at least now, it's run by someone who understands the difference between community standards and authoritarian control. And somewhere in Arizona, presumably far from planned communities with terracotta roofs and precisely measured gravel, Susan Blackwell lives with a criminal record, and the knowledge that her reign as HOA president ended because she couldn't resist taking a few bags of groceries that didn't belong to her. Every time I get a grocery delivery now, I watch the notification ping on my phone, see the driver drop off the bags on my porch, and feel a small satisfaction that they'll still be there when I go to collect them. It's a simple thing, perhaps even a boring thing, but that's what I wanted when I moved here, a simple, boring life where people don't steal from each other, and community leaders don't abuse their authority. The doorbell camera that started all of this still records faithfully, capturing nothing more interesting than the occasional delivery driver or neighborhood cat. I review the footage sometimes, though not the video of Susan taking my groceries. That's been archived, filed away with the court records and memories of a time when my biggest problem was keeping food in my house. These days my problems are back to normal things like work deadlines and whether I need to water my desert plants. The HOA sends out monthly newsletters that I mostly ignore, and occasionally there's a meeting where people debate riveting issues like whether to repair the community sign at the entrance or whether the Christmas decoration period should be extended by a week. It's mundane, predictable, and exactly what I need. Fresh starts don't always go smoothly, and mine involved a trial, a conviction, and the downfall of a petty tyrant who thought her position made her untouchable. But I'm here, still standing, with a full refrigerator and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, doing the right thing actually works out. The grocery delivery app just sent me a notification about a sale on imported pasta. I add a few items to my cart, schedule delivery for tomorrow afternoon, and go back to my work. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I'm already planning what I'll make for dinner with those groceries when they arrive safely on my doorstep, exactly where they belong.